Welcome. So nice to be here today. It is epically beautiful where I am, and I hope that it is beautiful where you are as well. As we wait for women to find their way into this live, I am going to just briefly recap what it is that we are doing inside this group. We're inside the Radiantly Alive Woman Facebook group, and we have started a really exciting series called the Scar Series. And this is a series where twice a week, I am breaking down a scar that you're interested in into 3 specific points or components. We're going to talk about every single scar in a physical form. Hello, Lauren. Nice to see you. Physical form, energetic considerations, and then most importantly, how you can start, like what you can start doing with your scar. So this has been really wonderful. I have an announcement inside the Radiantly Live Woman where I have just left a thing that says, toss a scar down that you're interested in, and I'm going to go through every single scar in its own video. I think this is so important and educational so that women understand the importance of scars and recognizing another way to kind of look at your body, look at your situation, feel into your physical, feel into your energetic, and most importantly, validate some of the things that you've been feeling. A lot of the time we are feeling stuff and we don't have answers, and we have tried to source out, talk to somebody, Google it, go into physical therapy or other types of talk therapy, whatever it is, and we come out of it and we don't really feel any better, and we don't feel like we got to the core of the problem. This is really common, and I want to just share with you some answers that you may be looking for. They may not have been thought about. Maybe nobody talked to you about scars. Maybe you had no idea that scars were even on the radar as important. Whatever it is, let's just all spend this time together in this community offering free women's holistic health advice inside this group. So as you're here, can you just send me a hello or a hashtag live so that I know that we're all kind of making our way in to the video so I can get started. And if you're watching this on a replay, please just hashtag replay so I know how many women of you are watching. I am giving each of these videos because a woman in the group has specifically asked it for this video. So if you can say hashtag replay, it just helps me know that those women have watched and received the information. So, hey Michelle, nice to have you here. All right, so let's get into the scar of interest. We are, yeah, that's a big point. No, I had no clue scars mattered until you, says Lauren. Scars are a big deal. And maybe you got a little bit of education post-surgery. Like maybe you got a spinal surgery or a knee surgery or shoulder, abdominal surgery, whatever it was. And maybe they gave you a little bit of education around just give it a massage for a few weeks and it'll be fine. This is not sufficient. And I want to tell you why and how you can start to resolve long-standing issues that you've been feeling just through simple techniques. So let's get into forehead scars. Forehead scars are super interesting. I have a lot to share, and it created a little bit of a buzz around the common symptoms that you may be feeling, mostly in your head and neck, if you have a forehead scar. So let's just contextualize what a forehead scar is, first of all. It could be anything on your forehead, obviously, but let's also put in the skull, like the top of the head. There's been a lot of times, I'm sure, in your own life where you've banged your head. If you're a very tall person, you've probably smacked your head on something that is low hanging. I think we've all done that, whether we're tall or not. And the other kind of important thing I want you to think about is you've seen kids do this. Maybe your own child did this. They smashed their forehead when they were young while they're kind of trying to figure out walking and speed and cadence and siblings and pets. And they probably smashed their head on a coffee table or something low that was hard. This is very common. I know a lot of women that have had this, and I have worked with women who have these scars, and they receive incredible health benefits. And I'll share a couple case studies in this video. So the first thing I want to just bring out is if you have a scar from when you were little, like from birth to piano bench, there we go, to any time like when you were pre-puberty, meaning like before you grew into your adult self. This is what I want you to think about with your forehead scar. The skull, like who you are now, is a much bigger version of who you were back then. You were very tiny. And so when you hit your head when you were small and you have some scarring, a lot of people will feel like an indent or like a groove or something in their head. That scar grew from a tiny head into a adult skull and head. So there is potentially a lot more scarring than you had thought about, because as your skull is having to try to grow into an adult shape, the scar is also having to kind of accommodate for that and make sure that this area is good to go and won't get damaged again. It will kind of continue to lay down fibrotic tissue as you grow. So this is an important thing in consideration to think about for all of you who have who have scars when you were little. It doesn't matter how old your scar is, whether you had it at birth or you hurt yourself a few days or weeks ago and there's a scar there. You can change the scar. You can change it doing 3 different methods. I have a direct way to work with scars, meaning like directly manipulating and working the scar with your own hands. And then there's an indirect way to work with scars, which is using the breath and using really specific movement to move the scar. Indirect is just as important as direct. In your head, there's a lot less opportunity to do like a specific movement. So just for an example, because my arm's right here, if I have a scar on my bicep and it's like kind of closed and compressed and like jammed in here, I can like just move my elbow into an extension to start to stretch that scar out, put tension on it, and then close it and compress it down even more. So it's really easy to apply movement, if you know what you're doing, to start to move and work the scar tissue. However, on your noggin, it's not so easy. You have an incredible amount of muscles in your face and then on your head, so that we as human beings have all the opportunity to make all the facial expressions that I'm sure you're familiar with. However, the muscles are not very they're not very deep. There's usually like a thin layer of muscle and usually quite a few layers. So for example, like around your eyes and mouth, you have a lot of different layers of muscle. So you can make all these different, I won't make them, I'll spare you that, all the different kind of face shapes and all the different kind of emotion and expression. So when we're talking about forehead scar, we want to like get a little bit smarter about how we're going to work the scar. So I'm going to give you that at the end. So just stay tuned for that little piece. Let's first talk about the physical. All right, so the physical, I'll just toss out the words and some of the symptoms that I had written up on the Facebook page today. If you have a forehead scar or a head scar and you're experiencing one or many of the following, headaches, tension headaches, migraines, headaches that are like behind your eyes, maybe one or both, anything that has to do with your sinuses. So chronic sinusitis, congestion, allergies. I'll explain a fun case study about that later, allergies. If I forget, someone please remind me. Anything going on with the congestion in your face, the sinuses in your face. Nasal drip, obviously. Anything with your breathing. If you have trouble breathing through your nose, like say you had always struggled as a kid to breathe through your nose, but you also smacked your head on a bench, like Lauren was saying, or like bunk beds, then you want to start thinking like that. You want to get smart in the way that you're thinking about what's going on with your body and how things line up in your own history and your own timeline. Then what else can we talk about? We can definitely talk about jaw and like TMJ, the joint that does potentially a lot of clicking, popping. Maybe it's painful to chew or bite or move your jaw in a particular way. Keep it open, like open it up and rest there. That's usually discomforting for a lot of people, especially if they have scars on their forehead or head. Anything going on with your ears. So your ears are very intricately linked to your jaw and to all of your senses. So if you have common chronic wax buildup is something to think about. Prone to ear infections or like fluid getting stuck in your ears and like not being able to get it out, that's really common as well. So those are some things I want you to think about in the head. There's probably a lot more, but just to give you like a starting point, I want you to think about those. Then there's other things that I want you to think about in relation to forehead, scars, and head that are not in the head. So some of the things that I spoke about in the video, in the post, was neck and shoulder tension, and maybe like decreased range of motion in your neck. I'll explain why in a second. Particularly anything going on with your discs, cervical discs, as well as your lumbar discs, low back discs. They could be a factor, and I'll explain why. It's very common for people who have stuff going on in this area, scar-wise, to have poor balance, to have really weak abdominals. So if those are checking off of your list, you want to just listen in on all these ways that we can help resolve that. Noemi, you're speaking to familiar here. Jaw things. What's the name of the joint you just mentioned again, please? I don't know. TMJ? I really don't know. Let me know if that was it. I think it must have been TMJ as far as like a fancy name for a joint. Yeah, chronic headaches, chronic earwax, nasal drip, all that. It's so important. Jaw pain, holding your jaw open. If you sleep at night and you grind your teeth, these are the things I want you to start thinking about. So, okay, here we go with the head idea. This is a really important way to start thinking about your cranium. This is also how you start thinking about your cranium in relation to concussion. When you get an impact to your head, you hit the piano bench. I want you to visualize, and it's pretty easy to visualize, your head as being like a closed cranium, like balloon-like structure that doesn't have a lot of give. So you know when you were little and you had a balloon and then you like paper mache stuff on it and it became like hard? I want you to imagine your head as that. Ideally, the head has all these different cranial bones that have a really gentle pulsation and movement. That's happening because of your breathing, because of your circulation, and the movement of your cerebral spinal fluid. This is what craniosacral is all about. Just the gentle kind of undulation and movement that each bone has with its neighbor and on its own. When you get an impact to your head, that kind of, it impedes all the natural kind of rhythm that all these little bones need to be doing against each other. So your body comes from this area, this kind of cranium that has a lot of movement, subtle movement, but really important movement to accommodate, fluid circulation and so on and so forth. It stops doing that. And what will happen is you'll get an indent, kind of literally, in the forehead. So in the forehead, and it will need to give somewhere else. Not in like a crazy way. It's not like you'll get a huge bulge out the side of your head. But where you impact in one area, depending on the vector, so if you went from the side or you went head on or it came from above or below to above, all that will play a factor into like where the kind of cranium had to give on some other side of the skull. So it went from being a kind of a malleable movement, really gentle movement, to being impacted and having like a kind of a recoil reaction in the skull. Then if you were little, that becomes, you kind of get stuck like that, and then your skull starts to grow and get bigger on that kind of impact injury that remains. So this is why, can you imagine the amount of pressure that your head is having to manage, like as you grow into your skull, which kind of gets triple or 4 times the size as an adult? It's a lot of pressure. It's a lot of tension that the skull is trying to manage and trying to like work around, instead of having that like pulsation that it should have because of all the factors I mentioned, like the fluidity and so on and so forth. This is the same reason for which you get a really bad concussion or really bad head injury. You get a head injury, it really rocks your cranium, really rocks your brain, your nervous system. And as the brain starts to swell, your skull is so constricted, it can't accommodate. It's very like dense already. The bones are really hard to protect your cranium or to protect your brain. But when it gets impacted even more, it kind of pushes in this shape that is hard for the body to like try to move around. So that is one of the reasons why we have chronic headaches, for example. All the stuff that I just listed, really. Okay, so that's a really important thing to think about. I'm not talking about this in like a large scale. So you don't necessarily need to go like looking and touching your head and being like, where's my bump at? It doesn't necessarily need to be there. I'm talking about something really subtle. But these small little subtle things will create a huge impact over time. And it's not necessarily something that you can touch as someone who doesn't have a trained sense of touch. Like a cranial therapist may be able to feel it. Someone else who uses their hands a lot, massage therapists, so on and so forth, may be able to feel it, but probably not you. And that's okay. You don't really need to go hunting for it. You already know where your scar is. So that's one thing I want you to think about when you're assessing the kind of extent to which your cranium could be impacted. Think about the pressure and the tension and like the vectors of all that. So I hope that piece makes sense off the hop. If someone has a question about that, let me know. Here's nasal drip right here. Sorry about that. Okay, then another thing I want you to think about is in the physical is what happens in the body when we actually get something flying at our face or we fly into something. There's a very natural reflexive reaction within the nervous system that makes sure that you don't hit your eye or you don't lose your eye. Have you ever seen like a kid or even yourself, maybe you were like headed towards something or a ball or like a sharp object was coming towards your eye and you like have this really quick, perfect reaction so it doesn't get you in the eyeball, it gets you somewhere else. Why I want to highlight that is because in the nervous system, we have a natural, very quick pull away. It's the same pull away that is in our body when we put our hand in a fire and we go, ow, that hurts. There's something like hardwired in our body to do that. So when we go flying forehead first into something, there's a natural reaction. The whole front line of the body, when I say front line, I mean like the whole front of the body, face, neck muscles in the front, abdominal muscles in the front, quads, front of the shins, everything in the front of the body, that will all naturally inhibit, meaning naturally go weak. So that when you like are headed in towards whatever it is in the front, all those muscles don't contract and like force you into it more. That would be weird. That would be not something the body would want to do. Instead of contracting and leaning into the painful object that's going to hurt you, the body will inhibit, weaken all these muscles and strengthen everything in the back. So it yanks you backwards. Okay, so the classic example I give is, have you ever stepped on like a rake? One of those like old school rakes that's like just in the grass and then it comes up and comes flying at you and you have this reaction? That's built into your body. You're not thinking about that. That just happens. So in the exact same way, when you go flying into something with your forehead, that natural reaction will come in. And interestingly enough, sometimes it gets that nervous system reflex will remain, meaning like you don't return back to having these muscles being easily contractible, like easily, it's called facilitated, easily workable. So this is something that's really interesting. This is why I'm talking about on the physical, having weak abs, having weak neck muscles. A lot of people have like a lot of compression and tension in the back of their neck, and it's because these muscles are not really doing anything, as well as the abdominal muscles are not really doing anything because they have this old injury in the head that weaken those, and they've remained weak. They're not like loosey-goosey, you can't feel your abs at all kind of thing, but neurologically, when you need these muscles as stabilizers to keep your head on right, to make sure you're not feeling exhausted and tired in your neck, same thing with here, to stand up straight and not feel tired in your low back, tired in your muscles to keep yourself up and stable. That's what I want you to think about when I say the muscles weaken. They just have they have a lower tolerance to stamina because of the forehead scar, because of the thing flying at you or you flying at it. Yeah, neck issues, like Lauren said, neck issues are really common. It's because that whole neck area is like causing, it's like stuck in a tension position and it's squishing the bejeez, to use a technical term. It's squishing the bejesus out of the cervical discs. And that over time, the body is not so keen on, and that can really irritate. And you want to have, I don't want to like go on a big tangent here, but you want to have an equal amount of muscle working in the front as the back. so that you don't get stuck in positions like this with a really open neck. When we're talking about forward head posture, there it is right there, forehead scar. Okay, so does that make sense? I hope that those like bring a lot of pieces together for you. So we had an example. The person who asked this question was kicked in the head by a horse. A big deal. And that obviously impacts the cranium on a very large extent when I'm talking about impacting the bone and the kind of knock-on effect of that through the skull. So that will play a huge part, and the skull will remain-ish in that shape. And as you start to exercise, for example, like I'm increasing my circulation, or I'm increasing my heart rate, whatever it is, the pressure that will come from that, because the skull can accommodate that like change in your fluid systems, will give you a lot of different things. It can give you, like I said, chronic headaches, but it could also impede all of these sense organs like I spoke about. If you think about the case study I'll talk about now, because I think it's super cool. She had a scar right here on her forehead when she was 4 years old. It was one of those situations where she smacked her head on something as a little girl, and she had this chronic congestion in her nose and her sinuses on the same side of the scar, and nothing could get it. And it was super bad in allergy season when the flowers were coming out, or when like the snow mold was coming wherever you're from. There's a huge kickoff of that during those times, and she thought it was just because she had really bad allergies, and she was, working on her digestion and all that stuff, which is helpful, of course. But when we actually went in and did the scar work, all of that relieved. And she was like, what, like, how can this happen? Like, how did I miss this? Or how did anyone miss this? And it's because we're not thinking about the knock-on effect of a bone here, what that would do to a bone here. And when we understand that when this gets impacted, it can absolutely push out other parts of our skull. If you've seen a skull in on a Google image, you'll see that it's a lot of different little bones coming together. It's by design that your brain or your skull is not just one big bone, because that would be very dangerous. If we got one little head injury and stuff started to swell, we'd be in big trouble. So this is all really important, that you think about your own timeline, your own injuries to your head. And I highly suggest, if you're a young mom, to start getting a list and writing this stuff down, because I think in the next 10, 20 years, I hope this will be really the way to think about the body. I will always talk and think about the body in way of timelines. I want to know what happened in your life and what kind of symptoms started around then, because that will build a very full picture for you and oftentimes walk you back into a major circumstance, event in your life, oftentimes a scar. So always think like that. Excuse me. Always think really curiously. So, so Lauren is saying that didn't know that our skull is not one bone. Go Google the skull, like bone anatomy skull. You'll see that it has many different small bones, tons of small bones. And that's so that it can accommodate all of these different things, like airflow going in and out of your body, cerebral spinal fluid, lymphatic, obviously your venous and arterial system. Obviously there's stuff that needs to go in like nervous system wise to make all these different shapes and articulations. There's a lot of cranial nerves that have very important functions in your head. So when you have a kind of structure impact, instead of it being like nice and smooth like that, and you get an impact and it does something that looks like that, it will impact the rest of your skull, because it is one shape. It could put tension in TMJ, for example. It could put a lot of space and length and opening in the other TMJ. So there's a lot to think about and kind of break down. And yeah, head injuries definitely count. I'm just going to open Michelle's button little point here. My son punched me in the nose whilst practicing his martial arts. Dang, I hope that he was little and not full blown. After that, my sinuses seem more blocked. I started to suffer with hay fever. I will bet on it. I'll put my money on it that will be in play. Absolutely. because the sinuses won't have as much space, and they'll be impacted on how fluid is entering and being drained from the area. So if it's not as open on one side because of an impact, it will have trouble, getting stuff in and out of the area. You can change that, just so you know. There's the whole point of this is that you can change all of this. Okay, good. He was 4. That's good. I'm very glad to hear that. Not a big knock, but still a big deal. They can totally, all of these things count. And it's nice to know that you remember that and that you found that important. Okay, so these are things I want you to think about physically. I think that that's what I wanted to talk about. Maybe the last thing I want to just mention is the fascial lines. So fascia is so first of all, let me back up. 5 or 10 years ago, they started talking about fascia. It became a very cool kind of trendy conversation. Fascia has been there, obviously, in our bodies for a long time, but they started to develop the imaging and kind of the knowledge and wisdom to put all this information together. And I want you to think about fascia as these strips. It's this continuous envelope. So really, your body, your muscle system has no beginning and no end, because everything is connected into something else by way of the fascia system. So in my first example, if I hurt my bicep here, I know that there's an envelope, an interweave of the fascia. Even though I have a scar here, it could be impacting my neck here because of the fascial system. So when you have stuff going on in your head, it could be impacting stuff down below. So the fascial system is big sweeps of tissue. The sweeps of tissue are dependent on how close to the core they are versus how superficial. And then also what vector line are they showing up on? So if you go and Google Thomas Myers anatomy trains, and you go into Google Images, you'll see these beautiful blue skeletons with sweeps of fascial lines on them. That's how I want you to start thinking about your body in a physical way. Super helpful. It is so much different than the red muscle guy that you see in a doctor's office. I want you to think about the forehead muscles actually come behind your head, go and line the whole posterior chain, the whole back of your body, and actually where that sweep of tissue ends is in your foot. It's incredible. And so there's another fascial sweep in the front of the body. So from the front of the toes, like the nail beds, all the way up the front of the body to these muscles called your sternocleidomastoids, all the way up into the face and into the jaw. There's a lot of different fascial tissue sweeping lines based on those main 2 components, the vectors of tissue, of muscle, and how deep they are in the body. Okay, I'm gonna go into energetic now, as much as I love the physical. So what if there's a major head impact but no scar, like the skin was not broken? Yeah, good question. You may find that just touching it, there'll be a dent, or people will say that they'll feel it in the bone, but they won't visually see it. That is still meaning the skull is impacted in some way. And so even though you may not see a physical scar, there'll still be an imprint of the event, of the circumstance there. So you do want to still work that and pay attention to that, because it's probably once you start feeling into it, it's probably really soft in that area because it hasn't actually fully come back to form yet. And that's something that you can assess by touching one part of your head and then touching another part of your head. And it usually, not always, but it usually is a little bit softer, a little bit squishier. Sometimes it's really dense and fibrotic, but it totally depends. But leaning towards squishy and soft. Okay, energetic. This is really cool. I think that this is a really important thing to think about. Not only was I talking about your tiny little head growing into an adult head, and so the scar tissue kind of spreading into a lot more area than you may have thought about. It's covering a lot more distance than you may have considered. I also want you to think about that rake coming up and hitting you in the face and leaning away from it, or in the exact same way, the human body won't pummel themselves into a hard object. There's a relaxation through the whole front of the body. This can get stuck in the kind of energy system, and it can keep you back in your posture, but keep you back in how you kind of stand in the world, how you actually are in your physical form in the world. So if you've had a forehead scar or have a forehead scar and you've had a head injury or forehead injury, particularly in the front of your head, it would be really cool if you were to just stand up and check and see, do you actually just naturally lean with your weight in your heels? A lot of people, a lot of women, a lot of men do. They'll lean back because their energy is held back. Everything's kind of back in the heels, into the back of the body, rather than being like forward and in the front. What does that mean like as you go through life? That means that you may have more of a tendency to sit back, more of a tendency towards just kind of being introverted, or towards being more slow to decide, being more of a tendency towards like stuck or stagnant, or just kind of hanging back, maybe like a self-esteem kind of issue, maybe a self-image kind of thing. You're not really like, I'm here in the world and I'm ready to do this thing. There's a kind of a lack of motivation, or a lack of like fire in your energy body, like how you feel about life and in your like sense of purpose. So I would love to know if that resonates. Yeah, there we go. Lauren says like, yeah, that resonates, and that's good to acknowledge, because a lot of that could be just because of the tendency of the nervous system has just hung you back here, and you haven't come back into your feet, into both feet, fully centered and aligned. It could be because of your forehead scar. So that's something I think that is really impactful to think about energy-wise. And then of course, if your forehead is impacted, the mind, like the way that you think, your thoughts and your energy, like your emotion, a lot of it can be impacted in how this forehead scar is. So I want you to think about that as well. Like, do you find you have a smooth, steady kind of control of your thoughts, or are they very like ping, ping, pingy? So I like to think of like when the skull is impacted like this as, you know that, I don't know if you remember this, you know that old school game, like that pallet game where like a ball would like hit from side to side? And I imagine like thoughts just kind of pinging around at like light speed in here, because they don't have that ability for like smooth circulation. They don't have a good ability to like, to really feel into and accommodate and be resilient and adaptable. They lost that in their skull, and that's going to come out in their like mind and their thinking pattern. So look at that, because that's a really cool way to think about the energy body and putting this all together with your physical. Those are the main things I want you to think about, is really how that shows up for you or someone you know. Send them to this video. Okay, so if anyone has any questions about that, I'm seeing a lot of like interesting, so good. Yeah, this is really important. We want to work the physical as much as the energy. That's super key when we're thinking about holistic health. And this is obviously so a very integrated, full body, full being way of thinking. So what do we do with this? Like, how do we start? I said at the beginning that it's hard to move your skull around. It's hard to like really get into a promising, like easy kind of movement to start impacting the scar. Breath as well is a little bit more challenging. However, I do find it a really good visual to use breath. But what I actually want, and I think is a safe thing to do, is to give you an actual touch thing that you can do with your scar. Now, if you've seen any of these videos, you would have heard me again talking on and on about the first step. And I'm going to do this in every single video, so just bear with me for a moment if you've already heard me talk about this, but it is so important that you follow this first step. It's crucial. If you don't do it, you may end up in a situation that you didn't expect, because nobody's talking about scars, because you may not have known about scars until you just met me. I want you to just kind of lean back on the side of caution and be okay with the idea that scars are incredibly impactful. They're little energy pockets of physical and energetic emotional stagnation and stuckness that need to be moved. And if we skip steps, if we force stuff, if we go too fast, that kind of pocket, that kind of knot can be released a bit too quickly and kind of catch you off guard. So when you're working with your scars, I want you to acknowledge that scars are a big deal. that you may not know what's in your scar, and that's okay. But you're in a kind of a grounded place to acknowledge that whatever comes out of your scar is something that you can deal with and something that you will be able to work with after you do this first step. Okay, so you need to do this first step. You need to do a few things for me. The first thing is you need to sit and hang out, maybe lay somewhere where you're really comfortable. Sit on the ground, lay on your bed, lay on the floor, whatever you want. And you're going to make contact with the scar, wherever it is on your forehead. You can do the top ones, but yeah, the forehead one is what I'm really just focusing on in this group or in this video. Contact the scar, close your eyes, and you want to develop that connection, that feeling of touch. Touch is a sense that we don't really activate very often. It's a very powerful sense that brings us right into the connection of what's going on in the area. It can help us with feeling it physically and energetically, which is what I want you to get a sense of. When you're touching the scar, I want you to feel the physicality of it. Is it ropey? Is it dented? Does it feel warm? Does it feel like there's a lot more scar where you like maybe beyond the actual line on your forehead? I want you to feel it. Is there altered sensation? Is there numbness? Is there hypersensitivity somewhere? Do you feel like averse to touching it? Some women get super nauseous and they feel really ill. And that's something you want to know off the hop before you begin. Then I want you to do the second thing is when you start to feel into the emotion around it. The emotion and the energy is really important that you take it before, during, and after the incident. So maybe you were so young and you don't remember and you're like, I don't know what happened before I smacked my head. I have no recollection of during the head smacking situation, and I don't actually remember after either. And that's okay. I want you to just at least try, because you may actually feel something deeper that you hadn't even recognized was there because you didn't have the tools or the information to tap into that. And so I want you to at least try to pick up the energy around the before, during, and after. So let's think about the horse kick to the head, for example. Maybe there's a particular energy around before it happened. Maybe the horse was freaking out, and maybe there was a feeling of fear and worry and lack and losing control. During the head kick, an incredible amount of pain, of intensity, of maybe fear of losing your life. And then the after is after the surgery, any point after. Did you feel like you didn't trust horses anymore? Did you feel like you didn't look the same and there could be an impact on how you view yourself? Did you have concussion symptoms so bad that extended over a period of time that maybe you lost your job? There's all these things that can be lodged and kind of wrapped up in each situation that you need to go into and check out on your own, because each scar is different and each woman is going to be different. So that's super important as well. So you must do this first step. You must connect for at least 5 minutes, feel into it physically and energetically, and then from there, when you get a good gather of information as like a baseline, you know what you're getting into, you know what you're starting with. Maybe you want to pause there and just reflect, go for a walk with that. And then the second thing that you do after, ideally, is you're going to actually start to move the scar. You're going to move the scar in north, east, south, and west directions. Okay? I'll just explain this really briefly. There's a lot more detail to this, but just to give you a little sample of how to begin, I want you to imagine that you have a northeast, southwest on your forehead. And what you're going to do is you're going to just apply like a very light touch and drag the tissue up. So you can see my eyebrows moving. Drag the tissue up, which would be north. You're going to hold that for about 30 seconds. Notice I'm just using 2 fingers. You don't want to like smash your head up. That's a bit harsh, and we're being gentle and respectful of our body and of our timeline and of our history. Then you're going to go in a different direction for another 30 seconds. So I'm going to pull down. 30 seconds, I guess we could call that south. Then you're going to go east and you're going to go west. Okay? And that is what I want you to just start with. I was going to go into a little bit more, but let's just start with that. So get an assessment of how it feels here. Feel into the physicality, into the energy before you go into the first step, because I don't want you to get caught off surprise caught by surprise by going into the actual activity of northeast, southwest too fast. Then you're going to do the northeast, southwest, and you're going to do it for no more than 2 or 3 minutes. We do not want to hang out here on a Sunday afternoon and go to town and feel like you're going to bust through that scar and all that stuckness and all that stagnation right off the hop. That is not respectful, not honoring your body, not listening. And so we want to really hone in on what's going on here so that we can fully resolve stuff. Allow emotion and feeling to come up. Feel into your situation. Apply the simple techniques of breathing into stuff when things get more challenging, or you feel energies coming up that feel like hurt, feel like sad, feel like anger, whatever it is, and just seeing where that leads. There's a lot of really amazing things that women have done with their scars just through my guidance, and I wanted to offer you that little simple piece. So if you have any questions, toss them out now while I'm here. And if you have any questions after the fact, you've watched this video and you want to ask me a question after, please do. I'm very active inside this group. I'm watching everything that's going on. So if you have a question, I will see it and I will respond to you when I can. And thank you for all being here. It was so nice to see all of you here engaging. I see a lot of wonderful things, a lot of light bulbs. The ping pong thoughts make sense. Mine has improved with yoga and breathing. Yeah, to my point at the end there, Michelle's got it. Really let things come in, breathe them out, be present. This is about being present and aware. Be conscious of what has happened in your life and acknowledge that you can change that. You don't have to be stuck with whatever it is that you're feeling. We can start to work on that, and you can take the reins of your health on your own and see where that goes. All right, I don't see any more questions, so I'll leave it there. Thank you for being with me, and I'll see you. I have another scar video coming up this week, so I'll see you then. Bye.